And welcome to our video lecture, our last biochemistry video lecture, topic A1.2 nucleic acids. This is our additional higher level content. So if you are an SL friend, you do not need to know this, but feel free to listen along because it's pretty cool stuff. Our guiding questions continue to be: how does the structure of nucleic acids allow heredity information to be stored? And how does the structure of DNA facilitate accurate replication? Our objectives for today: we are going to review the directionality of DNA and RNA, that 5', 3' stuff. We're going to distinguish between purines and pyrimidines, those nitrogenous bases. We're going to define nucleosome. Then we're going to look at a couple investigations that helped us understand DNA a little bit better, the Hershey-Chase experiment, and then Chargaff's rule. We mentioned in a previous lecture that DNA has directionality. That means that there's a 3' end and there's a 5' end. Remember that these 3's and 5's come from us counting carbons, because we do love to count the carbons in organic chemistry and biochemistry. So carbon number 1 is here bound to the nitrogenous base. We've got carbon number 2, 3, 4, and carbon number 5 is not on the pentagon, but instead is bound to that phosphate group. We call this the 3' end because the corner of the sugar with the number 3 carbon kind of sticks out here at the end. On the opposite side, we have the 5' end because we end off with carbon number 1, 2, 3, 4, carbon number 5 with its phosphate group. Remember that 5 and phosphate always go together. On the opposite strand, we have where we had 5, we have 3, where we had 3, we have 5. And when these run in opposite directions, 3 to 5 and 5 to 3, we call this anti-parallel because they're going in opposite directions, 5 to 3, 3 to 5. Remember that this is super important for all the processes that we're going to talk about later. DNA replication, when I use DNA to make more DNA. Transcription, where we make messenger RNA from the DNA code, and then translation when we use the messenger RNA code to make some protein. Because of this 5' to 3' directionality, we can, with just one carbon label, deduce all the other ends of our DNA strands. So if this is 3, then this has to be 5. And if I follow my 3 to the opposite end of that strand, this one has to be 5. And if this one is 5, then I go all the way to the end. This one must be 3. And here we're actually copying the DNA. DNA replication is happening. If this is 3, then this is 5. And if this is 5, then this has to be 3. Crazy. If this is 5, then this is 3. But we know that we can only go from a 5 to 3 direction. So as we're opening up the DNA in this direction to be able to copy it, I have one strand of DNA that can be continuously copied. The other one has to go in the opposite direction. So I can make a little chunk 5 to 3 direction, and then I can make another chunk from the 5' to 3' direction, and then we make another chunk from the 5' to 3' direction, and this is called discontinuous replication. We're going to talk a lot about this when we get to our DNA replication and metabolism unit, but it's kind of nice to start thinking about it now because it's a lot to think about later. And one of the reasons that we have this directionality is because we use the energy that is stored in the phosphate groups, and often there's more than one. We kind of chop off those extra phosphate groups, use that energy, or rather our enzymes to glue together nucleotides in condensation reactions. This is anabolism. Energy is required to make it happen, and the energy is stored in these phosphate groups. And so we take the phosphate that's on carbon number 5, remember the 5 and phosphate always go together, and we're going to glue carbon number 5's phosphate group onto carbon number 3 of the previous pentose sugar. Again, this is condensation. We make some water. We end up with a dinucleotide, and this could be DNA nucleotides in replication. It could be RNA if we're making messenger RNA in transcription. This directionality is super, super important. We mentioned in our last lecture that our bases come in complementary pairs. So adenine and thymine will always pair. If we have RNA, then we substitute uracil for the thymine. Guanine and cytosine will always pair. We're going to look at these pairs in a little bit more detail now. Because in science we do love to classify pretty much everything. So our nitrogenous bases come in purines and pyrimidines. Purines have 2 rings that are fused together, 1, 2, while our pyrimidines are just 1 ring each. What's pretty cool, when these guys pair together, complementary base pairs, we have 1 purine and 1 pyrimidine in each of our pairs. Guanine codes with cytosine. In DNA, we'll have adenine and thymine. If I have RNA instead of DNA, adenine will code with uracil. So 1 big guy and 1 little guy, and that just helps us to not have a bulge. If I had 2 big guys next to each other in the middle of a DNA double strand, or 2 little guys, we'd have some weird indent. We don't want that. So 1 big, 1 little in each of our pairs. You do need to have all of this memorized. You need to know that purines have 2 rings, and adenine and guanine are examples of purines, and the same for pyrimidines. So I have a super sketchy mnemonic device that feel free to ignore because, like I said, it's pretty sketchy. If you come up with something better, please share it with me because this is as good as I've got. So my mnemonic device is 2 puga, y cut 1. 2 puga, y cut 1. What does that even mean? In terms of a grammatical sentence, I have no idea. But in terms of purine and pyrimidines, 2, because there are 2 rings in purines. Pu for purines, guanine and adenine, our examples of purines. And then over here in our pyrimidines, there's a Y in pyrimidine. The pyrimidine examples are cytosine, uracil, and thymine, and they each have only 1 ring. That's all I got, my friends. 2 puga, Y cut 1. Let's talk about something that's a little bit less strange in my brain. Nucleosomes. No need for an odd mnemonic device to memorize these. Nucleosomes are the combination of DNA and then the histone proteins that DNA is wrapped around in our eukaryotic DNA. Remember that prokaryotic DNA is naked, no histone proteins. So these histones come in groups of 8. They are octamers for 8. Then we have the DNA that just kind of wraps around it. These nucleosomes, DNA and the histone proteins that the DNA wraps around, help us to coil up the DNA so we can get it smashed into the nucleus. We can keep it in our chromosome shapes when we need it to be in a chromosome shape. It also helps us to activate and deactivate genes. We'll talk about that a lot more when we get to our unit on genetics. But just a quick preview. We can add some acetyl groups to our nucleosomes, and that helps to spread the DNA out a little bit, makes it easier for our enzymes to get in here and make messenger RNA off of the genes. But then we also have methyl groups that help to shut down or mute the DNA, and then it's all closed up and the enzymes can't really get to it to be able to make that messenger RNA. The importance of those nucleosomes, not just for activation and deactivation of our genes, but also so that we can pack it into our nuclei. So each human chromosome is like 5 centimeters long on average. We've got 46 of them. We have so much DNA, like 2 meters of DNA. But those nucleosomes help us to wrap it up super tight in the nucleus so that it actually fits. We can pretty efficiently package our DNA due to those nucleosomes. What's kind of crazy is that we didn't always actually know that DNA was the molecule of heredity. Martha Chase and Alfred Hershey, these pair of scientists here, did an investigation where they used bacteriophages. I'm going to call them phage for short. So these phages are viruses that infect bacteria. Crazy sauce. Who would have thunk it? So there are viruses that make bacteria sick. So they took some bacteriophages that had radioactive sulfur in them. Sulfur is found only in protein. They took some other phages that had radioactive phosphorus. Phosphorus is only in DNA. And then they let these bacteriophages infect the bacteria. We knew that for the viral infection to actually happen, genetic material from the phage, from the virus, had to get inside the bacteria. If that material wasn't inside the bacteria, there wouldn't be an infection. So they let some of these radioactive sulfur viruses infect bacteria, radioactive phosphorus viruses infect the bacteria. And they looked to see, was there radioactive sulfur inside the bacteria? If there was, that meant that protein was inside, the viral protein was inside the bacteria, and therefore protein is the molecule of heredity. But if there was radioactive phosphorus on the inside, that meant that the viral DNA got into the bacteria, and DNA is the molecule of heredity. We already know the answer to this story because DNA is the molecule of heredity. So they found radioactive phosphorus in the bacteria cells, while radioactive sulfur from the protein coats of the phages stayed outside the bacteria. Bacteria in the centrifuge, the cells will sink down to the bottom of the test tube, while the viral protein coats will stay up in the, we call it the supernatant, the floaty stuff over the cells. So thank you, Martha Chase and Alfred Hershey, for helping us figure out that DNA is in fact the molecule of heredity. One of the reasons that scientists didn't think that DNA could be the molecule of heredity is because we didn't understand the structure of the DNA. For a while, scientists thought that DNA would fall into these molecules called tetranucleotides, where we had all 4 nitrogenous bases, guanine, thymine, adenine, and cytosine, bound up into a single giant molecule, a tetranucleotide. And if I just have a big pile of this molecule, how could it ever do what DNA needs to do, what heredity needs? That variation just didn't exist if I just had a big pile of this one molecule. And so Erwin Chargaff, the super cool guy, figured out by looking at different tissues that in fact we don't have equal numbers of guanine and thymine and cytosine and adenine, which meant that I couldn't have all 4 of my bases in a single molecule because I would need equal numbers if yes. So he took lots of different kinds of tissues from some ox, from some humans, and then compared amounts of adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. So I'm going to focus on this 96% recovery rate because that's higher, and so the results are just a little bit more reliable. And what Chargaff noticed was that we do not have equal amounts of thymine and cytosine, but we do have pretty equal-ish amounts of guanine and cytosine, and of adenine and thymine. And so Chargaff's rule led us to complementary base pairing. We know that guanine and cytosine go together. We know that adenine and thymine go together. But it also helped us to knock out this molecule. We were able to say, wait, the 4 nitrogenous bases don't come all together, but they're spread out in different ways. And when we were able to understand that our DNA could be spread out, these nitrogenous bases could come in different sequences, then voila, the world kind of opened up to our understanding of DNA structure and how DNA is the molecule of heredity. And on that exciting note, we have accomplished our video lecture. We talked about the structure of nucleic acids and how that allows heredity information to be stored. We haven't really talked a whole lot about replication. That will come later in our unit on metabolism. We did review directionality of DNA and RNA, 5' and 3' carbons. We talked about purines versus pyrimidines and my super sketchy mnemonic device. To Puga. Why cut one? We defined nucleosome, DNA, and the histone proteins that DNA wraps around. Hershey and Chase helped us figure out that DNA is the molecule of heredity, and Chargaff helped us figure out A's and T's go together, C's and G's go together. Good work today.